I'm just going to take you through some high-level principles of developing an assessment tool. Often people ask, well, what are those processes to create an effective tool? And hopefully this diagram will give you some insight into that process so that you can adapt for the tools that you're needing to develop as part of this program. So the first thing we do in developing a tool is we look at what we call the focus of the tool included with the research we conduct. So first thing you need to do is obviously go to the training.gov.au and look at the units of competency that are part of the assessment that you're going to conduct. Selecting one unit of competency obviously at this point, and you would look at asking yourself the question from the unit descriptor: what is the application of the unit telling me? And what is the overall objective in my own words to developing this tool for the unit? And I suppose you want to come up with a statement in your own words that suggests, look, by the end of this unit you should be able to, that being the learner, do whatever. Now let's say for example it's a unit on customer service, so it might be by the end of this unit, and reading through the descriptor we might have picked up on that by the end of this unit you should be able to recognize customer needs, show empathy towards your customer, and demonstrate product that meets those needs. The next thing we do is we look at this area called the elements, and also then we follow in more detail with the performance criteria. And in the elements, what we're trying to do is determine what steps this describes in the process of competency. So yeah, we've got an overall view up here of what we're looking for, but here we're starting to go, okay, well, what do those things look like step by step? And the element gives us some indication to that. And we obviously can almost identify step 1, step 2, step 3. And again, identifying those steps in your own words. Knowing what those steps mean in more detail, well, this is where the performance criteria helps us. The performance criteria helps us to then go, okay, well, what is actually included in every one of these steps? What is found in each one of those steps, which is part of those elements, as we call them steps, which is the elements. And really what is included typically ends up being a product or a process. Now, a product is more about something that someone will produce. So, for example, the performance criteria might have some wording in there talking about reporting in written form or sending an email. Well, that is actually a product, something someone will produce. They could actually produce that in an assessment process or the assessment you conduct. While the process might be something along the lines of displays good communication skills with reflective listening. Well, that is something you see, you observe, and therefore that's a process. So typically you're going to be looking out for what are the things they got to make, or what are the things they got to behave towards, processes or products. That's typically the broad categories for that. And then at the bottom of all this, you want to make your own notes, which is writing a summary that summarizes the performance, skill, and knowledge needed. So knowledge is about knowing why they do what they do. But the products or processes demonstrates to us that they actually can do it. Then what we do from there on, after we've concluded our research, we work down to the options for collecting evidence. Now, as part of a unit of competency in the assessment component of it, we see these categories of performance evidence and knowledge evidence. And those categories help us to actually look at what does it look like. So what should they be able to do in summary? And that performance evidence can relate to what are the sort of products they need to produce or the processes they need to display in their behavior as far as a product. And that's about the knowledge. What should they be able to describe and explain that they do in their performance? And the assessment conditions are more about what is the environment, the considerations of the assessment you might need to conduct and capture as part of this assessment tool. So we have got products, what they need to produce, processes, what they need to observe. And what we're doing from here on, this area of performance evidence, knowledge evidence, assessment conditions, should dovetail into the performance criteria and elements that we looked at earlier. So these whole two aspects in combination should make sure we have cross-checked to ensure we've checked everything and we've captured everything that may be described in this unit in terms of the competency outcomes we're looking for. We should be able to capture all of the performance we're expecting them to display, things they can produce and processes they need to display, and we also need to understand what conditions they need to be done under. So based on that, then we go, okay, well, let's look at this. Now we want to determine those products or processes we need to capture from our learner in the assessment process. What methods might we use to actually capture those things? So the methods might be, if you need to see someone doing something, clearly they may need to be on observation. So that's the method we would use. There might be something they need to produce, a report or something like that. Well, that's clearly a product. So it might be a portfolio checklist, or portfolio might be the evidence method we use there. And then further down, what we do from there on is we develop the instrument. Now there's a lot of discussion about, well, what is an instrument, what is a tool? Essentially the instrument is that part in your tool where you actually make notes, capture insight, where you record your judgments. It's that part of the tool where your learner may make their own notes, answer questions. It's where that information is actually captured. That's, strictly speaking, that's probably what people would consider the instrument. The tool itself is when you put the instructions in front of the instrument that then actually completes it to a tool. So instructions on what you as the learner need to do if you're the learner, and instructions on what you, the assessor, needs to do to conduct that assessment, together with where you capture that information that you have observed as the trainer, will be the tool. The instrument is where that information is captured. The instructions together with that instrument is what forms the tool. Now that we've put this together, we want to make sure that it supports the rules of evidence and the principles of assessment. Valid, reliable, flexible and fair being the principles about the process we go through, and valid, sufficient, current and authentic being the rules of evidence themselves. And then what we do from there is we go, okay, well, let's put together a instrument. Let's put our ideas together to capture things that tell us, what it is we're going to capture and how. And then that might give us an opportunity to have a draft of our tool. A draft is our high level capturing of what it is we're putting together, and making sure we map that as a matrix to ensure that we have actually covered everything. And by this stage we should be pretty close to what we call a trial and review of our tool. So we're starting to put together all our ideas here of the instruments where the information will be captured according to the methods that we talked about earlier. And now we've got a draft of our tool which we can put together and put to a panel, to an individual. That can be done in a number of ways which will actually capture our trial to make sure that we've covered everything. And then from there on, what we need to do is we actually format that tool based on by capturing some of the information that will help us. What we do is we are actually able now to finalize the tool with the correct information and put a version control on it to demonstrate that we've taken it through a process from beginning to end. So in essence, in creating a tool, we need to research and determine the focus, the options for collecting the evidence, what methods we might use, developing the instruments, and then trialing and reviewing that tool, and then finalizing that tool. So there's, in a nutshell, how a tool is put together.